My name is Clara Bennett, and the first sign that my role in my son's life had quietly expired arrived on cream-colored card stock with gold-embossed lettering. It came on a Tuesday in March, slipped between a water bill and a grocery circular. I opened it with casual indifference, expecting another real estate flyer, but the envelope felt expensive, thick, textured, deliberate. Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Bennett request the honor of your presence. I had to read it twice before it registered. My son was getting married. And this was how I found out: no phone call, no lunch invitation, no heartfelt announcement, just a formal card, as if I were a distant relative they barely remembered, but couldn't leave off the list. I stood in my kitchen, the invitation resting beside a stack of overdue bills. Ethan was 28, living in a downtown high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows and valet parking. I'd seen it once, briefly. He worked in tech, earning more in a month than I made in 6 months of insurance claims from a cubicle that smelled like old carpet. Sophie, his fiancée, was polished and poised. I had met her only twice, once at brunch, once at Christmas. She looked around my apartment like she feared touching anything, as though poverty might rub off. The wedding was set for June 15 at Magnolia Hill Country Club. Black tie optional, the fine print noted. I didn't own anything suitable. My best dress was a navy blue number, 5 years old, purchased off the clearance rack for Ethan's college graduation. Still, I held the card. I got the invitation, I said, trying to sound cheerful. Oh, good, he replied. No warmth, only acknowledgement. Congratulations, honey. Sophie seems lovely, I added. Yeah, she is. Listen, about the wedding, I'd love to help, I interrupted, already standing near the kitchen table with a pen in hand. Maybe I can help with flowers or taste the cake. Mom, stop, his tone sharpened. It's all taken care of. Sophie's parents are handling everything. I wasn't talking about money, I said softly. I meant being part of it. A mother-son dance, helping with the bouquets, we've already picked all that, he said with a sigh. Just show up, okay? Wear something nice, but not too conservative. Sophie's family is traditional. I kept my voice steady, though the familiar ache in my chest was rising. Something nice, for me. It's not about embarrassment, he muttered. Never mind. I have to go. Sophie's making dinner. The call ended, leaving only the hum of the refrigerator and the weight of disappointment. I stared at the invitation on the table. Black tie optional gleamed under the kitchen light. Optional perhaps, but so was I. After that call, I made a decision. If I was going to be an outsider at my own son's wedding, I would still show up with my head held high. For the next 3 months, I saved every dollar I could. I skipped meals, walked to work instead of taking the bus, and cancelled my cable subscription. I clipped coupons with precision, counted every penny, and said no to every small indulgence. By May, I had scraped together enough to buy a new dress, not just any dress, but one that made me feel like I belonged in a room full of country club members and designer labels. I chose a deep emerald green gown, simple but elegant, from a department store I'd never dared to enter before. It cost more than I had spent on myself in years. I bought matching low-heeled shoes with silver accents, and I had my graying hair professionally styled for the first time in over a decade. Soft curls and subtle highlights framed my face, and when the stylist turned me to the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. For a moment, I let myself imagine the way Ethan might look at me. Maybe there would be a flicker of surprise. Maybe he'd tell me I looked beautiful. Maybe he'd introduce me to his in-laws with a hint of pride. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror that morning, I touched the neckline of my dress and breathed deeply. The woman staring back wasn't just someone's mother, she was dignified, present, whole. No matter what happened that day, I was going to walk into that wedding knowing I had done everything I could. Not for Ethan, for me. Because sometimes dignity is the only gift you can still give yourself when others have forgotten your worth. The day of the wedding arrived, and the country club was exactly as I had imagined: pristine grounds, manicured lawns, a shimmering lake in the distance. Luxury cars lined the circular drive, BMWs, Mercedes, even a few Teslas. I had washed my 15-year-old Honda Civic the day before, hoping it might blend in. It didn't. Inside, the lobby glowed with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Guests mingled in designer dresses and tailored tuxedos, laughter echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I walked slowly, my heels clicking against the polished floor, trying not to feel so terribly out of place. I spotted Ethan near the grand staircase, resplendent in a black tuxedo. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his smile was wide as he laughed at something Sophie's father had said. Sophie stood beside him, radiant in a gown that looked straight out of a bridal magazine. They looked like they belonged on a magazine cover. I approached, my heart a tight fist in my chest. Ethan's eyes found mine. His smile faltered, not with warmth, but with something that looked unsettlingly like dread. "Mom," he said, voice carefully neutral. "You made it." I reached out instinctively to straighten his bow tie, a gesture from years ago, and he stepped back slightly, breaking the contact. "Thanks. You look nice," he said, the word hanging just long enough to sting. Sophie's father extended a hand. "You must be Ethan's mother, Richard Caldwell," he said. "Clara Bennett," I replied, shaking his hand politely. "Congratulations on gaining such a wonderful son-in-law." I found mine at table 8, tucked in the farthest corner near the swinging kitchen doors. The other guests at my table were strangers: an elderly woman with a hearing aid, a nervous couple in formal wear, and several empty chairs that would remain unfilled. We were clearly the afterthoughts. At the front of the room, the head table gleamed. Ethan and Sophie sat in the center, surrounded by her family. Table 1 held the Whitmore's closest friends, Table 2 was reserved for Ethan's college buddies, Table 3 for Sophie's sorority sisters. The seating chart was a clear diagram of proximity to importance. I sat down quietly, trying not to feel humiliated. A woman in her 60s approached, looking around uncertainly. "Are you Ethan's mother?" she asked with a gentle smile. "I'm Agnes," she said. "Sophie's great-aunt. Would you mind if I sat with you?" "I don't know anyone else here," I admitted. "Of course," she said, and I felt a small relief at the friendly face beside me. She leaned in. "All this is very beautiful, but not really my world," she whispered. "I do," I said, smiling faintly. "But it's Ethan's special day. That's what matters." As the cocktail hour dragged on, I watched Ethan work the room like a seasoned politician. He shook hands, laughed, posed for photos, making time for everyone except me. I told myself he would come over soon, that he was just caught up in the moment, saving the best for last. But each minute that passed, a hollow feeling opened inside me, slow and familiar, the ache of being forgotten by the one person you loved the most. Dinner began with practiced elegance. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved like clockwork, serving the head table first, then working their way down the hierarchy of tables. At ours, we waited. Margaret received her plate first, lukewarm but edible. Then came the elderly woman's, followed by the nervous couple, and then, nothing. A young server approached, flustered. "I'm so sorry. There was a mix-up in the kitchen. Your meal will be out in just a few minutes." 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Around us, other guests were finishing their meals, raising glasses, laughing at inside jokes. I sat quietly in front of an empty place setting, my stomach growling, my pride shrinking. Eventually, a different server brought my plate. The salmon was cold, the asparagus limp, the potatoes looked like they had been scraped off someone else's plate. Agnes glanced at it and whispered, that's inexcusable. I smiled and said, "It's fine. I'm just happy to be here." That was a lie, but one I had grown used to telling. Halfway through the cold salmon, I heard Ethan's voice echo across the room. He stood, preparing for his thank you speech. But before addressing the guests, he leaned toward Sophie, just loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Did you see? They finally brought my mom her food," he said with a smirk. "She's used to eating what life leaves behind. She won't mind." Sophie laughed high and brittle. A few others followed her lead. I set down my fork. My hands were steady, though something inside me cracked wide open. After dinner, the lights dimmed and the music swelled. Ethan and Sophie stepped onto the dance floor for their first dance, gliding together like a picture-perfect couple in a movie scene. I watched from my corner, smiling politely, my hands folded in my lap. My dress, my hair, my carefully chosen shoes, all of it had been selected for a moment I had hoped would matter. Then came the parent dancers. Sophie's father, Richard Caldwell, twirled her with ease, his movements polished and proud. Sophie's mother took Ethan's hand next, swaying with him slowly, sentimentally. I waited. Surely, my son would come find me. Surely, he hadn't forgotten. I had imagined this moment countless times in the privacy of my small apartment. I had practiced a few steps on my own, letting old music from my phone fill the silence. But as the evening wore on and more family joined in, cousins, uncles, friends, all spinning and laughing under the golden lights, Ethan never looked my way. No hand extended, no nod, no mother-son dance. He was too busy, too celebrated, too wrapped up in the life he had built. One in which I existed only on the margins. And I finally understood. I wasn't invited to participate. I was only invited to witness quietly from the shadows. Agnes leaned over and whispered, "Are you all right, dear?" I looked at the laughter, the swirling gowns, the man who used to be my little boy now dancing through a life that had no room for me. For the first time all evening, I felt entirely clear. "I'm perfect," I said. And for once, I meant it. I stood, smoothed my emerald dress one last time, and walked toward the exit. No one noticed me leave, not Ethan, not Sophie, not a single soul. The silence outside felt different, like something had finally settled. Back home, I hung my emerald dress in the closet, changed into jeans and a t-shirt, and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I began to write, not in anger, not in grief, but with a clarity I had never known before. "Ethan," I typed, "I'm writing this while your wedding is still fresh in my mind, though I suspect the parts one remember will be different from what you choose to keep. Your comment last night about me being used to eating what life leaves behind wasn't just cruel, it was honest. And that honesty gave me something I didn't expect, perspective." I continued typing, explaining how I had spent years accepting leftovers, time, attention, respect, and that I had unknowingly taught him it was acceptable to treat me as second best. But not anymore. This wasn't punishment. This wasn't revenge. This was me finally choosing to matter to myself. I planned the next steps carefully, ending financial support, selling the house, and reclaiming my life for the first time in decades. For the first time, the woman who had spent her life raising someone else would do something entirely for herself. By July, the house was officially on the market. I had forwarded Ethan's angry emails to my realtor with a brief note, "Please expedite the listing process." It was time to reclaim the life I had spent decades postponing for him. Within a week, I received 2 offers and accepted the higher one, $115,000 over asking price, cash, with a 30-day close. For the first time, I felt the weight of freedom pressing gently on my shoulders instead of the familiar ache of obligation. I had already placed deposits on a furnished apartment in Savannah, and a month-long bed and breakfast in Vermont for the fall. For 30 years, my schedule had revolved entirely around Ethan, his needs, his wishes, his approval. Now, I was planning for myself. The woman who had raised him had done her job. She was finally free to live. Savannah was warm when I arrived, not just in temperature, but in spirit. I rented a small apartment 4 blocks from the river, on a quiet street where neighbors still nodded hello. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I took a part-time job at a local bookstore owned by Lila, a woman who hired me on the spot after a 10-minute conversation. "You seem like someone who understands that books are more than merchandise," Lila said. She was right. I spent my days surrounded by stories and my evenings walking along the river, eating simple meals, and reading on a second-hand porch swing I had picked up at a yard sale. For the first time in decades, my life felt entirely my own. For 3 months, I didn't hear from Ethan, no calls, no emails, no signs. Then, one Thursday afternoon in October, Lila handed me a note. "Some man called looking for you," she said. "Said he was your son. He sounded desperate." I folded the message carefully and tucked it into my pocket. 2 days later, Ethan appeared in person. He looked smaller, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. His expensive shoes were scuffed, his voice cracked as he said my name. "Please," he whispered. "Can we talk?" I told him I got off work at 6, and we agreed to meet at the cafe next door, which closed at 7. I had 1 hour. That evening, I sat across from him as he stumbled through an apology, carefully chosen, rehearsed words spilling from his mouth. "I miss you," he said. "I miss having a mother who believed in me." "I did believe in you," I replied, "but belief without boundaries isn't love. It's enablement." He asked how to fix it, how to start over. I told him he couldn't. Not because I hated him, but because I had already left. He just hadn't noticed until the benefits stopped. As I walked away from that cafe and into the soft Savannah night, I didn't look back. I had spent 30 years accepting leftovers. Now, I was building a life where I set the table. And this time, I was choosing where I Saturday. After that night at the cafe, I didn't hear from Ethan again for several weeks. And honestly, I didn't reach out. For the first time, I realized that I didn't have to chase the attention of someone who had repeatedly treated me as optional. My days in Savannah were now filled with the rhythm of my own choosing, mornings at the bookstore, afternoons by the river, evenings lost in books and quiet reflection. Working for Lila turned out to be more than a job, it was a sanctuary. She encouraged me to run book clubs, organize local events, and interact with people who genuinely valued my ideas and presence. Each small accomplishment built a sense of confidence I hadn't felt in decades. I started journaling every evening, documenting not just events, but thoughts, realizations, and moments of quiet victory. The act of writing made me feel tangible again, like my existence mattered outside of my role as Ethan's mother. Then came the first hesitant message from Ethan, sent months after the wedding. "Clara, can we talk? I realize I treated you poorly." I read it, closed my eyes, and let out a long, steady breath. I didn't reply. Not yet. Not until I could see clearly what he wanted, and why. Meanwhile, Savannah continued to nurture me in unexpected ways. I started making friends who weren't tied to obligation or family drama. I joined a small gardening group, learned how to make fresh bread from scratch, and even signed up for evening art classes. Each activity, each connection, reinforced that I was capable of happiness independent of my son's approval. The world felt larger than the walls I had been confined to for so long. I no longer measured my days in terms of sacrifices for someone else. I measured them in moments of choice, freedom, and joy. I could spend a morning browsing an art gallery just because I wanted to. I could linger over a coffee and a book, noticing sunlight on the porch, hearing the river flow. These were luxuries I had never permitted myself. When Ethan finally arrived in Savannah, I was prepared. Not with anger, but with boundaries. I had learned that love without respect is hollow. I had built a life that didn't need his validation. I could speak to him, hear him, even forgive him, but I would not allow him to erase the years of self-neglect I had endured. And in that moment, I realized the most important lesson of all: it wasn't just about Ethan or his wedding. It was about me reclaiming my dignity, my space, and my life. I had spent too long giving myself away. Now, I was finally free to choose who I wanted to be, and how I wanted to live. By the time Ethan arrived in Savannah, I had built a life I didn't need anyone's permission to enjoy. My apartment, small but cozy, overlooked the river, where sunlight danced on the water each morning. I had cultivated friendships, hobbies, and routines that reminded me daily that I mattered. For the first time, I wasn't defined by my role as a mother. I was defined by who I chose to be. Ethan showed up at my door one crisp afternoon, looking worn and smaller than I remembered. His apology was careful, rehearsed, and hesitant. "Clara," he began, I realize how I treated you was wrong. I want to make things right." I studied him silently. There was no anger in my eyes, only clarity. "Ethan," I said, "you've realized what you did, but it doesn't erase the past. Love without respect is hollow. You treated me as optional for years, and I let it happen. But that ends now." He looked down, shame in his expression. I didn't see it then, but I do now. I nodded. "Good. You can apologize, you can explain, and perhaps we can rebuild something, but I won't allow myself to be erased again. I've learned that my worth is not tied to your approval or your life choices." The relief on his face was palpable, but I could tell he also understood boundaries had changed. This was no longer about him asking, or me giving. This was about equality, mutual respect, and honesty. Over the next few weeks, we started small, coffee dates, short conversations, brief shared memories. Ethan was learning to engage with me as an equal, not as someone whose only purpose was to support his life. And I, in turn, learned to love him in a way that didn't require my own self-sacrifice. Meanwhile, Savannah continued to nurture me. My evenings at the bookstore turned into evenings spent walking along the river, meeting friends for art classes, and exploring the city's charm. I traveled to Vermont for the month-long bed and breakfast stay I had booked earlier, immersing myself in quiet, restorative time. Each experience reminded me that life could be rich, full, and mine to shape. One evening, as the sun dipped below the river's edge, I realized how far I had come. I had spent 30 years living for someone else. 30 years accepting leftovers. Now, I was building a life where I set the table. Where I chose where I Saturday. And in that moment, I understood the greatest lesson of all: sometimes the most powerful act of love is choosing yourself. Not revenge. Not anger. Just the quiet, resolute decision to live fully, freely, and unapologetically as the person you were always meant to be. Clara Bennett had arrived, and she was finally home.